Ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to bring together today our opening keynote speaker on Arctic innovation technology. Mr. Mead Treadwell is, in my respectful view, a Renaissance man. He is a former Lieutenant Governor of the great state of Alaska. He is the former chair of the United States Arctic Research Commission. He's the president and chief executive officer of Quelac Liquefied Natural Gas. He is also the chair of the Iridium Polar Advisory Board. Mr. Treadwell was the 11th Lieutenant Governor of the state of Alaska, and he also served in the U.S. Arctic Research Commission under both Presidents George W. Bush and President Obama. In those positions, he helped develop and implement U.S. Arctic policy and expanded participation of the Arctic Council. He funded and advanced the 8-nation Arctic Marine Shipping Assessment, which set a blueprint for marine safety and reliability in the newly accessible Arctic Ocean. In advancing Arctic cooperation and sustainable development, he chairs the satellite firm's Iridium Polar Advisory Board and co-chairs the Washington, D.C. Woodrow Wilson Polar Institute that is led by Executive Director or by Director Mike Shrega. He chairs the Iceland-based Arctic Circle Assembly's Mission Council on Shipping and Ports, and is also a member of the International Advisory Board of the United Kingdom's-based Polar Research and Policy Initiative. And those are just a few of the highlights of this distinguished champion of the Arctic. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to introduce to this audience today our keynote presentation on Arctic innovation technology, the Honorable Mr. Mead Treadwell. Sir, I respectfully give you the floor.
Well, thank you, Church, and I'm just very impressed with everything that you're doing at ADAC, and thanks for that great introduction. It's also fun to just kind of see who's on, who's listening. I see a large number of old friends and one of my neighbors. So it's nice to be with you all this morning. I have a slide deck. I don't know if, let me see if the share screen works here. If it does, The title of my talk this morning is America's Arctic Vision and the Innovation to Achieve It. Can you see that? Can you see the cursors? Yeah, okay. And basically what I'd like to do in this keynote is cover three things. One is, what is our Arctic vision? What kinds of technology is going to help us achieve that Arctic vision? And what kind of innovation is needed, not just in Arctic technology, but also a few innovations in Arctic policy. And I'll just start, as I have most Arctic talks I've given in my life, with what I call something like Mike Shrega likes to call the 7 C's. I like to say the Arctic, what do we do in the Arctic? We help feed the world, and we have two of the richest fisheries in the world with the Bering Sea, North Pacific, and the Barents Sea area. We help fuel the world, not just with fossil fuels, huge amounts of natural gas in the Arctic, huge amounts of oil in the Arctic, but also one of the world's best test beds for renewables. Iceland has an economy which is built on exporting renewable energy in the form of hydro or geothermal in the form of aluminum ingots, for example. And we do much for the world's energy supply. We help provision the world, and whether it's the large nickel mine in Russia, large zinc mine here in Alaska, the large iron ore mine in Baffin Island, we are very much a part of the coming electric power economy, electric vehicle economy with what we produce. We help protect the world, and you need look no further than the Fort Greely installation for missile defense, the Thule Air Force Base for radar, what we do in the North Pacific. We're very much a part of what was Billy Mitchell's vision in terms of protecting North America and, frankly, our allies in both Europe and in Asia. We help keep the world, and I like to say that one of the most important things that we're going to be doing in land and sea transportation in the generation to come is what we do in air transportation today. When I first moved to Alaska in the 70s, we were known as the air crossroads of the world. And in the cargo basis, we still very much are the air crossroads of the world. And I expect as this maritime domain opens up to be a sea crossroads of the world, and expect as we grow rail links between Alaska and North America, we will also be very much a land bridge connecting the world. Finally, we all know we like to inspire the world. The Arctic inspires us. That's why we're all part of it. But you have people here who've lived here for 10,000 years, building a culture in some pretty amazing and harsh conditions. And we've certainly built and saved some of the most glorious national parks and scenery that there's quite a bit to see. And so I think the vision for the Arctic in the 21st century is to still be a sustainability leader in these areas, in energy, in transportation, in tourism, in fisheries, communication, in mining and security. And all of these things, as Church, you very well laid out earlier this morning, they require technology, and we need to be a leader there too. So, someone who's worked on government science, I like to say that when I was chair of the Arctic Research Commission, we had a Arctic research budget about $400 million a year. Church, you're now on the commission. I commend you well as those, if you're on for 10 years, that's $4 billion that'll go through your fingers one way or the other. Spend it well, spend it wisely. But we all live in a pioneering state, and I have always liked to do startups, and I've done a number of startups in Alaska, but also from the office above the garage where I'm sitting, I also helped create a company called Digimarc, which watermarks the money in your pocket, your driver's license, music that you might be listening to, films that you might be listening to. I was chairman of a company called Immersive Media that started Street View for Google. It was one of our venture ad astra companies. Church mentioned that I'm doing work with Iridium. I mentioned a few other startups. Recently have been helping Saberwing, a drone company raised. We're working with the Alaska to Alberta Railway and Keelak LNG. But what I'm going to say about all of these startups is there's a few things that I think apply to government science as well as, and as a startup investor, I've learned the first thing you want to do is you want to invest in the inevitable. Find or assemble the team capable of making the inevitable happen. It's inevitable that we're going to have better communications. It's inevitable that we're going to have broadband around the world. It's inevitable that we're going to have domain awareness beneath the ocean, on the ocean, above the ocean, in space. Find the team that's going to make that particular inevitable piece happen. And the second thing I always tell entrepreneurs looking for investment, is identify your strategic partners early and follow them closely. And when opportunity strikes, be ready. And I love to tell a story. During the Digimarc years, we really thought we would be the world standard in digital watermarking of video. There was a company that had the copy protection technology. We must have visited their office half a dozen times. The answer was no, we've got our own solution. And later, through a miraculous combination of events, a good friend of the owner of the company showed up at my house for lunch, and he said, "Who have you been talking to?" And I said, "The CEO." And he said, "Oh no, let me call the owner." And out of that came a $70 million investment in our company. So we were ready. They didn't know they were ready until we made the right connection. But always look at those strategic partners. And I've told, even with Keelak right now, with both our off-takers in Japan and some of our potential partners, I've said, you may not know it yet, they partner for us, and we're going to make that happen. What I've also learned as a startup investor is when you look at a venture, when you look at a new technology, I really look at four corners of the blanket that you've got to cover. And you need four corners covered to launch a blanket toss or a startup. The first is that old David Letterman trick, is this anything? Does the technology work? Can you actually make this thing happen? And the second thing, especially in the private marketplace, you have to ask the question, does it create value? And third, is there a business model to harvest that value? And fourth, is there a team that can execute? if there is value and there is a business model, you can raise the money. But you can't even get to that discussion if the technology doesn't work. Finally, just as I said before, invest in the inevitable. If there is a team that can execute, you're finding the team that's capable of making the inevitable happen. And those two maxims from startup investing, the inevitable and the team, and the strategic partners, I think are important to take to any general technology development approach. Let's talk about technology in the Arctic. It's always been said necessity is the mother of invention. I like to say in the Arctic, necessity is a mother of invention. We have had lots of others, but the thing that you should know is, first off, we've been inventing here for most of the 10,000 years that humans have lived here. And when you see things that residents of the Arctic have contributed to the world, like the kayak or snow goggles, which are sunglasses, the blanket toss mentioned before, which predated the trampoline, we really have been an innovative place for a long time. We're seeing current innovations. We're seeing things like the packraft. We're seeing lots of applications of drone technology. We're seeing new sensors developed here at the University of Alaska for sounding rockets, and quite a bit in the whole Internet of Things sensing domain. And I just want to remind Alaskans, remind folks working in the Arctic, that we have always been either an innovator or an early adopter. The head of Scientific Atlanta said in a speech here, Alaska is an early adopter of geosynchronous satellite communication. He wouldn't have had a company. And we're a test bed, and we've been a test bed, one of the world's best places to be a test bed for alternative energy, because we've got so many systems off the grid or microgrids that pay so much for energy. You can test something that's a little bit higher cost that may not work in Texas, make it work here and bring things down the cost structure. So that's something that I think Alaskans don't always consider themselves to be, but we are a very innovative place in the Arctic. To try to make the State Committee on Research at the University of Alaska created the Alaska Innovators Hall of Fame in 2014, and annually we celebrate and honor Alaskans in the field of innovation. We have recognized some of those inventions over time immemorial, such as the kayak, the blanket toss, sunglasses, ski skins, the halibut hook. And in recent times, we've recognized Alaskans like Alex Hills, who invented something I'm using right now called Wi-Fi. Something I used this morning that Mike Edgington of Girdwood helped create, called Siri on your Apple iPhone. This year we maybe jumping the gun, but I think we expect to include in the Hall of Fame Jack Dangerman, who created GIS technology and is the head of Esri, and really started here and explained to me in depth how, had it not been for Alaskans saying, can you take this service and turn it into software, that he wouldn't have had a company. And we had the packraft, and Roman Dial, my friend, has been one of the evangelists for that technology that has given people all sorts of access. So just to remember, we come from a tradition of innovation. And one of the things that's always fun about innovation is often people looking for the Holy Grail, looking for a grail in one area or another. And I'm just going to say in this keynote today, and Church, you already did this morning, you've got the beautiful symbols with all the different kinds of innovation that you're working on. But I'm going to just highlight a few of necessities seeking innovation in today's Arctic. One of them very clearly is net zero greenhouse gas emission technologies and energy. We are an energy powerhouse. The energy we have needs to be cleaned up in certain areas. I believe it can be. Our natural gas may be the easiest form of energy to decarbonize and yet still transport. And there's quite a bit to be done in that area here in the Arctic. On domain awareness, whether it's in space, in the air, on land or sea, but beneath the sea, there's so much yet to be done there, and so much more that can be done when you harness the next thing, which is big data and artificial intelligence. I mean, you know, because most of our land imaging satellites are in polar orbit, it turns out that there is probably a larger data set for the Arctic region and the Antarctic region than any other place on Earth. And the old pictures that might have been taken by Landsat in the 60s are still data sets that can be mined by artificial intelligence to help us figure out what has happened really with ice. How do we fill out that bathymetric map? How do we track wildlife? What did we not know we're seeing when we were seeing it before that we've to understand it better with ground truth and so forth. I have not been on communications. I've not been on any Arctic security discussion, including the brilliant one you held last week, Church, where we haven't said we want better comms. And working with Iridium, and you'll hear from them later today, you know, the value of a LEO network with low latency and that capability is significant. And now you've got several different folks chasing that direction. Innovation in transport is very, very important in today's Arctic, and we'll talk about that, whether it's with drone aircraft or icebreakers or railroads or dirigibles, some of those things that are coming along. We are going to be the test bed that will make these happen. And finally, I'll finish with policy innovation, some of the public and private policies that we need to be working on. But, you know, the first thing I want to say is that even though there are bankers have said we're not going to finance things in the Arctic, even though there are people, you know, this place should be left alone. I'm going to say it is not being left alone. It won't be left alone. You know, President Biden recently made a statement that he's all in for natural gas. Secretary Granholm, new Secretary of Energy, said she very much supports liquefied natural gas exports. A Japanese government official said to me recently, we're buying so much from Russia, we want to diversify with Arctic supply. I think we're going to be in the natural gas business for some time in the Arctic. And I think we're going to be in that business to help get Asian power plants off coal as one example, and also as a way to decarbonize. And we'll talk about some of that. I think when you look at our minerals, I mentioned the zinc and the nickel and the iron ore that's being developed in large mines, but you've got really a holy grail here with our allies on making rare earth mineral economics work, and whether the rare earth minerals come out of our partner in Greenland or Northern Canada or Alaska, you see a big push for that, and there'll be a significant push. So don't write off Arctic presence issues. Your civil partners in getting Arctic presence to happen are going to be the resource developers. At the State Committee on Research, we just basically committed to do a series of workshops, or one large workshop on identifying technologies on greenhouse gas reduction that Alaska should be part of, either on the internal consumption side or on the export side. And I just want to make the point here that most of the reductions that we've had in greenhouse gas emissions since the climate fight began have come from switching from coal to natural gas. And there's more to be done there. A second thing that's very, very exciting is there's new technology available to decarbonize natural gas, basically right before the power plant. So you can use the benefits of gas transportation infrastructure and yet burn only hydrogen. Our oil and gas production is among the lowest greenhouse gas emitters in the nation, and that's one of those Arctic holy grails, is understanding that as more and more accounting methods are looked at. So let me just talk about a few of the technologies I'm looking at, urging this workshop to look at. One of them is a little company down in Australia called Hazer. It turns out if you run natural gas through molten tin, you get ash on the surface of the molten tin and hydrogen bubbles up. It also turns out if you put natural gas in a vessel at about 500 degrees for 40 minutes with just iron ore, you get synthetic graphite as a byproduct, and pure hydrogen comes out of the top. And in fact, ground was just broken this week on the first scale demonstration plant of this technology in Perth, Australia. Is this something that we should try at Prudhoe Bay? We burn 400 million cubic feet of natural gas a day at Prudhoe Bay. It's the cheapest natural gas in the nation in that regard. And it could well be that we may be one of the best places in America to try this decarbonization technology right here on our home ground. The Japanese are doing a feasibility study on hydrogen in their commercial supply chain. They actually have been working, this is a Kawasaki project with Australia to develop hydrogen from coal and liquefy it, transport it, and bring it into the market. A big question is, will power plants in the next 50 years be running on LNG with maybe a decarbonization process? Will they be running on hydrogen that would be shipped? And transportation of hydrogen, we know, is a difficult proposition. Or will we be switching to ammonia? And I think all three of those products are in the race. I think Alaska could be very much a supplier on all three of those. And understanding the technology and understanding the economics in our position, I think, is very, very important. Methane detection. I mentioned, one of the things that people don't really like to talk about. This picture of I always mix up her new last name, but Katie Walter at the University of Alaska, where she detailed methane emissions, bubbling methane in Arctic ponds. There is quite a bit of methane emission in the area, and getting good climate accounting is really essential to the entire climate change battle. Right now, the Arctic tundra produces more greenhouse gases than all the cars, trucks, trains, planes, and power plants in the Western United States. And I think it's important that we understand what Mother Nature is doing. It's a feedback of climate change, but it's been there a long time. And then the other thing is that we want to make sure that the oil and gas industry is doing a better job in reducing methane. We've done a very good job in Alaska, but methane detection is one of those technologies that I think is important. We've got some new efforts to do that from space as well as from aircraft, and that's something to watch. Another holy grail is domain awareness innovation, and we pulled this slide from the Marine Exchange website, but domain awareness covers many subdomains: space, land, sea, air. Financial domain awareness, I think, is very important. Cyber domain awareness, I think, is very important. Climate domain awareness is very important. And civic domain awareness is some reasons why I argue very strongly for continuing our and reinvigorating, say, our neighborly Russia. Because I can't tell you how many intelligence assessments I've seen from the, of what Russia may be doing or what China may be doing, where we actually know the players over the community or through the business community and know their challenges, may have been asked for investment, that sort of thing. I think it's very important that in the Arctic, we have all of these sensors to understand our domains, but we also have the human intelligence and the human under it happens. Because I can tell you, one of the weirdest speeches I was ever asked to give in my life is 11, I guess, as lieutenant governor, I was invited to be a chair of a panel for Vladimir Putin's cabinet, which are all presenting to Putin on what their Arctic budget should be. And I can tell you, for those of you who work in U.S. agencies, they have the same challenge of getting money for the Arctic that we do. Lussenbriggen was there. A number of Alaskans were there in Archangels for that meeting. But the fact is that human and personal relations are very, very important to keep up in this small neighborhood, no matter what's happening between our nations. I mentioned big data and artificial intelligence in my business right now. I think it's very important to come up with much better wildlife tracking, both onshore and offshore. And there's quite a bit. There's quite a bit that can be done in terms of mining old imagery, as I've mentioned. I also include this slide from Iridium, which showed June of 2019 of where people have pushed the send button on Iridium phones in the Arctic, inside the Arctic Circle. There is quite a bit of other artificial intelligence that can kind of help you understand where human activity is going and what people are doing. A large number of those buttons, as you can see, were either moving across the Arctic sea ice pack or aircraft moving across. There's just a lot of ways to tell what's happening in the Arctic now that can come together on a dashboard. But anyway, big data, artificial intelligence can help us understand sea ice, can help us understand wildlife migration, it can help us improve charting, and it can help us see threats. And I just think that's very important. I also want to say that unmanned systems will enable persistent sensing of the Arctic region. And, you know, if you go back in the 90s, we had to clean up, or we worked with the Air Force to clean up and identify a number of radioisotope thermal generators. They were basically barrels filled with a nuclear material that produced heat that you could convert into electricity, that ran sensors. They were doing things like seismic monitoring in the Arctic to understand and collect information on Russian nuclear testing nearby. And what was interesting about those devices is that you needed the RTGs because you could only get out there once a year or so to collect the data. We are moving from tethered devices where you might go replace the batteries once a year beneath the Arctic Ocean, devices like those RTGs, to persistent systems that can report in on a minute-by-minute basis, a second-by-second basis, a nanosecond-by-nanosecond basis. And quite a few of the domains depend on remote unmanned aircraft or unmanned autonomous underwater vehicles. Church, I really want to commend ADAC for the pioneering work that you're doing in this area with experts from all over the country. And I say that there's quite a few companies here in Alaska. We've developed actually a little kind of cell or a cluster of people who are working on UAS technology. I've talked to two fairly frequently. One, Indemnis, I think, is doing some amazing things to help safety in remote aircraft. Another working on cluster and radio and navigation and artificial intelligence aboard some of these small sensors. So I just know that one of these holy grails is persistent surveillance, persistent sensing. Again, not necessarily to spy on people, but understand what's going on. And understanding what's going on with sea ice, I can tell you in navigation studies we're doing for KELAC, our biggest question is, when is the multi-year ice coming into the Beaufort from the Canadian archipelago, for example? And the more we can use these kind of sensing devices to ground truth what the satellites may be telling us, the better it is. Noise is going to be an issue as more ships enter the Arctic, and understanding what's happening with noise and the effect on wildlife is very, very important. It's very important to ship design. And some of the long-range autonomous underwater work that you're doing, Church, is very, very important in establishing baselines and understanding what's going on there. Communications. One of the inevitables, one of those holy grails is that humans are going to want broadband everywhere. We want it here, we want it on the moon, we want it on Mars, but we certainly need it in the Arctic. Iridium has just recently upgraded with 77 new satellites in the LEO network that can provide a much better broadband capability. And then you've got other companies working on LEO networks, including Telesat, Starlink, Project Kuiper, OneWeb. And we'll see what happens. But I think the point is the Arctic market is one where the capability has been generated, the growth is there with the LEO networks, and then you're also seeing some ground networks coming about. There's like a little company in Alaska that most people are innovations, where the guys who actually ran Link 16 for the Air Force have developed a way to have airplanes, in essence, have a satellite like capability with a mesh network of aircraft. And it's just, I will tell you, it is a lot of fun to watch the private sector go for the Holy Grail here. It was actually very interesting to see the Northern Command, NORAD, say that they wanted money to help do their own comms network. I can just tell you this is one place where there's a lot of private money going in. One example of how the private sector and the defense security sector need to be working much better together. I talked about transportation innovation. There's a little company that's done a lot of work in Alaska, has been doing some experimentation, has some federal funding to do some experimentation in the buffs called Saber Wing, and their goal is to be able to pick up 1,000 to 5,000 pounds and transport it to 5,000 miles in a unmanned aircraft, fairly autonomous. They have just gone through a round of funding, and it's a pretty exciting company. I visited the Skunk Works down in Lockheed Martin, where they had a heavy lift airship. I'd say their effort is probably a little slow right now, but there's also a French effort working on the same holy grail. I believe that technology will be coming forward. I mentioned what the Alaska and Alberta Railway is doing, and it's just really an innovation to go back and redraw that line on the map and do things a little bit smarter with a brand new railroad. But again, that's something that's very important for Arctic and North American security. Icebreakers. The thing that we often see this icebreaker map in Arctic security discussions and the potential sea routes. Let me just say this. Most of the ships that the Russians are using to ship natural gas really don't need icebreaker escort now. Most of what we're planning to take from Keelak out of here really doesn't need icebreaker escort for most of the time that we use it. But I don't think I'd want to be on a highway without a tow truck, and I don't think I'd want to be operating regularly in the Arctic without icebreaker capability. And Russia claims essentially a monopoly on the Northern Sea Route. They've got a tariff structure. The U.S. has argued that that's illegal, even though there are provisions in UNCLOS that allow some regulation of adjacent ice-covered seas. But the point is that icebreaker technology itself is enabling more in the Arctic than I'd say the reduction of sea ice. And let's just look at this here with Yamal's Arctic LNG. This is a double-acting tanker. It has a spoon-shaped bow and a V-shaped bow. When it's going through ice, the spoon-shaped bow can easily do what icebreakers do, which is go over the ice, crush it, and move it. And the V-shaped bow can be efficient for sailing in open water. Your propulsion are these azipods, which can turn 360 degrees. This is an innovation out of Finland that has dramatically increased the efficiency of icebreakers by over 35%. It's key to the design of most of the new icebreakers coming along. And I'll just say that these icebreakers carrying LNG, carrying 16.5 million tons a year right past us through the Bering Straits, are really what has dramatically added to the tonnage of the Northern Sea Route and Russia's Arctic presence. And America should not be ignoring this. Icebreaker innovation has been powering Arctic shipping growth. And these carriers the next generation coming along, these are globalization. These are designed in Finland, an ally and friend of ours, built in South Korea, an ally and friend of ours operating in Russia to sell LNG to allies and friends of ours. 15 of these have been built since the launch of the Christophe Marjorie. And when we take a look at the number of icebreakers in Russia, just realize that what has been created here is something that we very much can and will be a part of. You also have an increasing number of nations who have icebreakers that could support a safe shipping exercise. This is obviously the science vessel Polar Stern, but there's quite a bit of icebreaker capacity coming along and new needs for cooperation. Very happy that the Coast Guard is moving forward with the polar security cutters. The first one is under construction, expected in 2024, with second and third cutters in 2025 and 2026. It didn't get much fanfare, but it took us, it was very hard to actually get President George W. Bush to say the word icebreakers when I was on the Arctic Research Commission. President Obama said it when he came up here. President Trump committed at the Coast Guard Academy graduation his first year in office to the 6th, and then had the Arctic strategy document, which came out last year, which actually has committed us to more. I think the United States is going to see what we can do to close the icebreaker gap in the years to come. I'm going to move now to policy innovation before I conclude and just say, in our church, I mentioned that the Arctic Research Commission with Lawson Brigham, we created the Arctic Marine Safety Agenda. What's amazing about this is that the 8 Arctic nations negotiated word for word every word in these documents, but it was essentially a blueprint for marine safety that we're still fulfilling. And from that blueprint, we built upon Article 234 of Law of the Sea, and there was Russian, Canadian, and U.S. legislation, national policies, but it did accomplish the Arctic Search and Rescue Agreement, the Oil Spill Agreement, the Mandatory Polar Code, current Arctic Council work by PAIM on best practices in shipping, and the Coast Guard Forum. And I guess I'm going to say this. I think we've done a pretty good job in establishing rules for the Arctic. What we haven't done yet is found ways and mechanisms to produce resources for the Arctic for U.S. presence. And that's why this Mission Council on Shipping and Ports in Iceland was tasked to kind of say, is there a business plan for a new, can we work together to establish safe, secure, and reliable seaways in the North? Can we have a League of Arctic Ports that help generate safe, secure Arctic traffic? And how do we pay for sustainable Arctic shipping infrastructure? Because as that Arctic Marine Shipping Assessment report said, we need charting, we need ports, we need fuel stations, we need domain awareness, we need search and rescue capability, we need icebreaker support. And paying for all that has been really the holy grail question of what's going to happen on Arctic shipping. And you get people saying, well, we assume we'll never figure out a way to pay for it, and thus it may or may not happen. Or we can figure out, okay, the Russians use coercive power to pay for it, so we're going to cede to them the monopoly. And that's the question that we have. And what policy innovation can we have? Senator Murkowski introduced the SEAL Act, which actually morphed into a Federal Advisory Committee Act, which passed Congress this September, that said, go out and design, set up an advisory committee that Secretary Buttigieg has to appoint, go out and design a seaway system for the Arctic, bring it back to Congress and tell us whether or not we should charter a corporation like the St. Lawrence Seaway or ComSat to make safe shipping happen. And I'll just put it this way. When you have a sea route here that saves 40% in trade from East Asia to Europe, I don't think American taxpayers should pay for the icebreakers so that China can sell goods to France. But I do think we should, like we do with the airport, shipping services. And 18,000 a year go through the Suez Canal. If you take just 10% of that, that's 1,800. You take 1% of that, that's 180. The Russians are charging $500,000 a voyage. At 180 ships, that's $90 million. That's more than the U.S. icebreaker operating budget. And I guess my point is this, is that if we can hang up a shingle and can gather the resources necessary, we can pay for some of our infrastructure, and we can offer an international service. And I've said to my friends in Russia, it is not good for world security for you guys to control shipping. It should be done on more of an international basis, as we do with aviation. So let's see where we get. But I'm glad to see that advisory group was established. I mentioned policy innovation, direct export of LNG. In Alaska, we've been focused on pipelines. My entire life in Alaska, we've been trying to build a pipeline for natural gas, one system after another. It's almost like, the long war. What the Russians did with Yamal is they said, okay, they have pipelines to Europe. They have the Nord Stream project, which has been controversial, but they wanted to diversify their markets to Asia. And so they began direct shipping. And they are 2,600 miles from the Arctic ice edge. Point Thompson, where we're planning to start with Keelak, is less than 600 miles from the Arctic ice edge. A round trip to a port is 22 days in the summer, 25 days in the winter from Alaska. And so we'll be testifying for the legislature next week on this. We're not asking for state support at this point. We're asking for state understanding, and have had strong support. But just recognize the Russians are cleaning our clock in a business where we are so much closer to the marketplace. We should be embarrassed. And the Russians here have got now on the 16.5 million tons they've done, they They completed front-end engineering design for the Arctic 2 project in Yamal in late 2018, made a decision in September 2019 before COVID. Most of the financing of this is coming from our allies in Asia. And they will be doing floating liquefaction plants at Yamal to almost double the production of that. And they and Qataris are going for a large share of the world LNG market. It needs to be there for security and diversification reasons. And frankly, our gas uses less greenhouse gas to get there to the market as well. I mentioned new rail links to the Arctic. President Trump authorized a border crossing for A2A rail in the fall of last year. Right now, there's quite a bit of money being done to prepare a permit before the Surface Transportation Board here and the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency here. The amazing thing about this is that for a whole number of commodities, potash, sulfur, grains, bitumen, containers, traffic moving in and out of the Port of Alaska can be in the heartland of North America 2 to 4 days faster than going to certain ports. And the congestion in ports and West Coast ports has been tremendous this year. There is an opportunity for Alaska to have this. So I guess what I just, in terms of policy innovation, when you think about the Arctic, you know what we do in aviation, you know what we could be doing in shipping, and this is what we can be doing in the land bridge. There's quite a bit of ways and active efforts with hundreds of millions of dollars of private funds being spent to put us much more on the global transportation map. So with that, what I want to do is conclude by just one, reminding you we are an innovative place. Two, let's do what we can through groups like ADAC and through supporting the entrepreneuring community. And Church, I was really glad that you brought that up this morning to understand that our entrepreneuring community is very important. And U.S. policy must innovate. As we change administrations, I think we still want to protect people's needs and nature. I think we have to be very real about the role of the Arctic in the U.S. economy and enhance that role with innovation. And you know, I have to say that our delegation, Senator Sullivan, Senator Murkowski, have used the opportunity of these upcoming meetings with China here in Alaska to help educate our new cabinet leadership about the role that we play in the Arctic. I think we need to leverage military and civil needs to fill the infrastructure gaps. And whether it's Arctic ports, icebreakers, telecom, power, fuel, domain awareness, everything we've talked about, if the military needs it, I think the civil sector needs it too. And there just needs to be much more thinking about cooperation. I believe it's very, very important for global security and for peace in the Arctic to keep Russia from establishing a monopoly on Arctic sea routes and shipping. I don't want to talk about ugly scenarios, but if you did have a problem in the South China Sea and the Arctic became much more important, you want to be able to deny somebody the chance to deny shipping through the Arctic. And that's why it's very, very important to have a U.S. presence. And frankly, if you can get commerce to help pay for that U.S. presence with what we talked about, all the better. We talked about containing China's efforts to expand geopolitical influence in the region. As I said in an op-ed in the Daily News yesterday, China is our biggest market for many of our exports, which is really officially it's about 10% of our economy. Actually, it's more about 20% of our economy. And I think we need to understand that we need Chinese markets, we need investment, but we need to clearly make it well known that the United States is going to have a presence in this region, and nobody's going to deny us use of the Arctic Ocean, and nobody's going to deny others. And finally, I just want to make a plug again for something that I think was an important change of policy over the last, it was one of the unwritten things when we did the U.S. Arctic policy in 2009. We didn't mention Greenland, but we talked about it quite a bit in the policy formulation. It's now U.S. policy to develop a close and lasting relationship with the people of Greenland, and today because it was indigenous Alaskans who settled Greenland years ago that we have familial ties and quite a few important strategic ties. And I just want to encourage this community to pay attention to what's going on there. So church, that's my keynote. I want to thank you for the opportunity today, but maintain your optimism. Don't forget those holy grails, and let's bring together what we can to make the Arctic work. God bless.
Thank you very much, Governor. A profound set of reflections. I've been getting a number of texts. Unfortunately, people know my cell phone and they know how to use it. So I've received a flurry of texts. We're not going to get through all of them. I have about 10 questions here. So I'm going to try to cherry pick. And those that I can't cherry pick, I'll try to put together in a short, pithy thing to give you for further reflection. One of those, so you're having an impact, Governor. People are texting their thoughts and asking questions. And I'm impressed by the quality of the questions already coming in. First thing I'd like to bring to you is that Governor Treadwell, Walt Disney wrote a number of years ago, "If you can dream it, you can do it." When you think about Arctic innovation, what do you see are the things that you would want to dream that the rest of the world could think about doing? It's an open-ended question, and I thought I'd start with that very lofty one. If you could dream, you can do it. You're the dreamer now, Governor. What would you want us to do?
Well, first off, show the world that you can still pioneer, because a lot of people don't believe pioneering is possible. Even if you look at the debate on climate change, the effect of new technology is not very much part of the debate, and yet it's not going to be politicians that solve this problem. It's going to be technologists and people who put things together. So I would say go fearlessly into solving problems that are there. My dream for the Arctic is that we have a place that is more biologically diverse, is strong even as human activity grows. And I think that's very important that we work on that. I think it's very important that we work on international cooperation. I mean, the fact is that despite our problems with Russia, we have huge cooperation with them in aviation right now, huge cooperation in weather. We need a little bit more in fisheries and so forth. And I want to see the Arctic to be a peaceful, cooperative place where we're all working together.
That's a perfect way to start, Governor, or to pull that thread further forward. Thank you for that. I have another question that's in. It said, Governor, I saw a presentation that Senator Sullivan shared in December about Arctic security. Both the Arctic Domain Awareness Center folks that are hosting this event and the Vice Commandant of the U.S. Coast Guard talked about the need for persistent presence. As you look to technology in developing, what's developing now, or what's on the horizon, what technologies would you point us towards that can enable persistent presence that's so needed by the U.S. Coast Guard?
Well, first off, the reason why I included policy innovation is if you figure out a way to pay for more icebreakers, whether it's things like the export of LNG, things like the Seaway concept that this FACA committee is going to be working on, that policy innovation can help pay for the hardware. That's number one. Number two, I think, wherever you stand on ratification of the law of the sea, the interesting thing is that Russia is expanding its ownership of the Arctic Ocean bottom to cover about 45% of the Arctic Ocean. It means you can't attach things to the bottom without their permission. And so everything you're doing with gliders and autonomous vehicles means we can go collect the information that we need for climate, that we need for pure geology, that we need for understanding contamination in the Arctic Ocean there without attaching ourselves to the bottom. So I think some of the autonomous work that you're doing will help us there. Telecommunications, we've got this coming generation of LEO satellites in the existing Iridium system that we really should work as hard as we can. But I'm also excited about things, quantum computing, quantum communication. There's also a very neat study I saw came out of Yale the other day about how we can use some new technologies to find nuclear submarines, nuclear devices. So I guess I would say the strategic needs that we have for domain awareness and the civil needs we have for domain awareness basically point to some of the same technologies.
Governor, thank you. That's an outstanding reflection. Outstanding reflection. I have a text just in that's going to the top of the list. I have a few others to go, and I'm watching the time. So if you can bear with us a few more minutes, sir. But decades ago, you championed the idea of building out the natural gas plant in Kenai when there's no real competition, and we could have built a huge market for our natural gas. Are we allowing the same thing to happen regarding Arctic infrastructure, including ports? Are we being slow to realize our potential?
Yes, but it's interesting. We are doing a study at Commonwealth North right now to follow up on our 2009 report, Why the Arctic Matters. And we started out what I thought would be a small, and Church, thanks for your help on that, by the way. We started out, we thought would be a short summary of progress we've made in the last decade. It's actually turned out to be the longest chapter in the draft report. And the fact that we now have authorization for the port in Nome, that we've got a better understanding of what we have at Port Clarence, that there is potential. I'm hopeful that, as Churchill said, the Americans always do the right thing after they've exhausted the other possibilities. I'm hopeful that we're going to get there and don't quit trying.
I admire that. That's a great comment, or that great quote in history. I appreciate that. Thank you for that, Governor. I have another question, and this is a member who was watching last week's Arctic Leader Summit and bringing the thread forward. Governor, as you look at the future as we emerge from COVID life, what new would you anticipate that could create an increased interest in Arctic industry? What new in this post-COVID life would you consider that could create new entrepreneurship in the Arctic region?
Well, that's a good question. I haven't really thought about it before in this instance, but right before COVID started, the Germans held a very interesting conference. I didn't go, but I sent a friend who had written about pandemics and what might be coming out of the tundra and the sea ice. And I think there's going to be a lot more. We've learned huge things about testing, huge things in this whole vaccine exercise and so forth. And so one of the threats in the Arctic with climate change that we've talked about is zoonotic diseases and other things that might be, unearthed over time. So that's kind of a COVID footnote that I hope we never have to experience like we did with COVID, but I think we're better armed. I think also people are going to want to start traveling again. I think tourism is going to grow here. I think we're going to find ways to catch up on some of these stuff. I actually think where we're going with energy, being cleaner energy is going to be very significant for the Arctic. So the demand for broadband, the demand for the ability to kind of do what we're doing here, which is convene 87 of us in a room virtually, is going to grow. And we're, someday in the future, we're going to have two-way TV telecommunication. I was told in 1964, and I'm glad to see us experience it. Someday we're going to have it without the signals that say my internet is shaky. So God bless.
Governor, I appreciate that profoundly. I'd like to ask if we can get two more quick questions in before I know we're running tight. And this is actually the first one, if I could. You mentioned this discussion about the A2A rail, and thinking about the advancement of, or the decline of permafrost across the essentially high latitudes of Canada and Alaska. What challenges in establishing rail in an era of degrading permafrost can the community research address to try to mitigate?
That's a good question, an important question. We've done one internal paper on that, and I'm sure that we're going to be doing more work at places like the University of Alaska on that question. But, we learned a whole lot about permafrost during the construction of TAPS. The Russians have built railroads. Now they're very close to Yakutsk across permafrost, and so there's an operating experience there. Basically what you want to do is you want to keep the cold cold, and if you're shipping something cold, you don't want to make the cold colder. If for example, it's chilled natural gas, where we've done a lot of work on pipelines and frost bulbs. I think that one of the things that there's a company here in Anchorage that has come up with much better monitoring of change to be added to civil construction projects, so that you've got thermistors in the soil to know what you're doing. But basically, heck, I'm just going to say you can go down to Florida and look at what we did to the Everglades in building roads and what we've learned about hydrology since. And what we have to do is pay attention to the hydrology and to the permafrost, do what we can to protect the permafrost where we're on it. And if water starts to flow, make sure you've got stable civil structures as water begins to flow. So those are all parts. I don't have the slides right here in front of me, but I could give you a whole slide deck on this. And thanks for raising the question. It's an important question.
Thank you, Governor. Let me ask you one last question, and this is actually I profoundly thank the folks who posed this one. As you look to the future, Governor, and all the entrepreneurship activities you're a part of, and then you look back at what the research is doing that is government sponsored, is there a better way for the community of entrepreneurs to harvest research that's been conducted by federal funding?
Well, yeah, your question after the premise is different than I thought it was going to be, and it was going to be: is there going to be a better way that the government can help entrepreneurs get going? I can tell you, at Venture at Astra, after we won a contract with the Air Force, it took us a year to get through the Defense Accounting Agency before we could ever even do the work. I think the Pentagon and the other agencies are learning better how to deal with this. I guess I would say pay attention. And the reason why I say pay attention is because I can't tell you how many times an entrepreneur will come to me and say, have I got the only way to do this? And I go, how do you know you got the only way to do this? Well, because I thought it up, but nobody else knows what I thought up. And I said, somebody else is probably doing some of the same thinking. And it is very important, whatever field you're in, to network like crazy. The government, the people doing the stuff for the government are part of the networks. It's important. We learned this, we had a big debate inside one of the tech companies I was part of do we or don't we put white papers about our technology on the internet. Had we not done that, our two largest investors, one in the A round stage and one in the C round stage, would never have found us. So let people know what you're doing. Let people know what you're thinking about it. And there are ways to protect your intellectual property, yet tell the world that you're working in a particular space. And I think if you do that, when I go back to saying, identify your strategic partners early. Again, I tell this Digimarc story way too much, but I spent a miserable week in Cambridge, Massachusetts in a smelly Howard Johnson's, had my laptop stolen, waiting for a guy at Polaroid to return my call. And about 5 years later, when we'd gone public and we had money and Polaroid went bankrupt, we bought the division of Polaroid that was led by the guy who didn't return my phone call. You can bet I called the chairman of our company and said, fire that son of a gun. He could have owned us. But the point of it is that we knew they were a strategic partner for our technology. And if you pay attention to who's working on something strategically, they will ultimately figure out that your small startup company venture invention is something that can help them, and they'll share with you. So network like crazy. I always advise companies I'm part of to keep one foot in the academic sector. I advise universities to be as porous as possible. You have to bring knowledge into a university as well as export knowledge from a university. And so there's no structural solution I can think of better than network.
Governor Treadwell, we are truly and profoundly grateful for those reflections. Do you have any final remarks for us before we give you the standing and virtual round of applause you so richly deserve?
Well, just thank you for your time and attention this morning, and you have much better experts than me on the rest of this program, and stay tuned for a really good pair of days. Thank you.